Every year, on the night she was born, the sea took Omorose for exactly one night, and every year it gave her back before sunrise, until the 10th year when the sun rose and the water was still empty. Stay till the end, my people. What the sea finally told her that night is going to make you ask yourself a question you won't be ready for. So, I'll ask it now. If something greater than you had a claim on your life since before you were born, would you want to know? Comment your answer below before we begin, and let's find out what Omorose chose. In a fishing village on the Delta coast, where the river forgets which way is home and simply becomes the sea, there lived a girl named Omorose. She was born on a night the elders still speak of carefully, choosing their words the way a man chooses his footing on wet rock. It was a night the tide came in 3 hours before it should have, past the mark it had never once passed in living memory, right up to the door of the hut where her mother labored. The midwife, an old woman named Iye was the only person who did not seem afraid. She had delivered half the village into the world, but this birth she performed differently, humming a song under her breath that none of the younger women recognized, holding the newborn to the open window facing the water before she ever handed her to her mother. Omorose's mother died 3 days later, of no sickness anyone could name. Iye raised the girl herself and told anyone who asked that it was simply misfortune, the way misfortune sometimes visits new mothers. Not everyone believed her, but in that village, my people, there are things the mouth learns not to say twice, because the sea, they believe, is always listening for its name. Before we continue, has your family ever had a story like this? Something strange around the birth that the elders explain away, but never quite convincingly. Tell me in the comments. I think almost every family carries at least one of these. On the night Omorose turned a 1-year-old, she went missing for the first time. She was found at dawn, sitting calmly at the water's edge, dry, unharmed, humming the exact tune Iye had hummed the night she was born. She was 1 year old. She had never been taught that song. It happened again the next year, and the next. By the time Omorose was 10 years old, the village had stopped being frightened and started simply expecting it, the way you expect the rains in April. Every year, on the night of her birth, she vanished from wherever she was sleeping and was found the next morning at the water's edge, calm, dry, remembering nothing. Iye never once tried to stop it. This, more than anything, unsettled the village more than the disappearances themselves. A grandmother who does not fight to protect her granddaughter from something clearly unnatural is a grandmother who already knows exactly what is happening and has decided, for reasons of her own, not to interfere. By the 9th year, Omorose was 19, and something had begun to change in the mornings after. She no longer just returned calm. She returned able to do things she could not do the day before. The first time, it was small. She walked past a dying mango tree the village had given up on, and by the following week, it was heavy with fruit. The second time, she sat beside a child burning with fever. Simply sat, saying nothing, and by morning, the fever had broken. The village began, quietly, to need her. On the morning after the 9th disappearance, an old fisherman who had known Omorose since she was a baby pulled Iye aside and asked her the question the whole village had been too afraid to ask for 19 years. What is happening to that child? And for the first time, Iye did not deflect. She said, "Come to my hut tonight. It is time she is not the only one who knows." That night, Iye told the fisherman, and later, the village elders, and eventually Omorose herself, a story that had been sitting in her chest like a stone in a shoe for 19 years. 3 generations before Omorose was born, the village had faced a hunger season so severe that children were dying faster than the elders could bury them. Omorose's great-grandmother, a woman remembered only as Iye Aisosa, walked into the sea at low tide, not to end her life, the story insists, but to bargain with it. Olokun, the great spirit of the deep, keeper of wealth and mystery that our people have honored since long before the missionaries came with their own names for God, met her in the shallows. Iye Aisosa asked for the hunger to end. Olokun agreed, on the condition that one daughter, in every generation that followed, would belong partly to the sea, not taken, not drowned, but claimed one night a year, every year, until the debt of that hunger season was fully repaid. A debt measured not in years, but in the amount of healing a single life could pour back into the village that had almost lost its children. Your great-grandmother did not know how long the debt would take to repay. Iye told them, none of us have ever known. We only know it has never yet been enough. An ancestor made a bargain to save a whole generation of children, and the price landed on descendants who never agreed to it themselves. Is that ancestor a hero, or is what she did unfair to everyone who came after her? I want a real debate in the comments on this one. Omorose listened to all of this in silence. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. How do we know when the debt is finally paid? Iye answer was the reason the fisherman's hands trembled around his cup of palm wine. We don't. Only Olokun knows. And the only way to ask is to go where I have never had the courage to go myself. Into the water on the 10th night and ask the sea directly. There is a particular kind of fear, my people, that does not shout. It simply sits at the edge of every conversation, waiting. That was the fear that settled over the village in the weeks before Omorose's 10th disappearance. The elders debated whether she should go at all. Some argued the debt should simply be allowed to run its course, silently, the way it had for 3 generations. Better an old familiar arrangement than the risk of provoking Olokun by asking questions a spirit might not wish to answer. Others, led quietly by the old fisherman, argued that a debt no one understood the size of was not a debt at all. It was a blank check, and Omorose deserved to know what she was truly paying toward. Omorose herself said very little during these weeks. She spent them instead learning everything Iye could teach her. The old songs, the old names for the tides, the proper way to address a spirit older than the village itself without causing offense a person might not survive. On the morning before her 10th birthday, she walked to the shore alone, sat where she always sat, and said, out loud, to water that gave no visible answer, I am not afraid of you, but I want to understand you. Tonight, when you take me, I am not asking to be given back. I am asking to be told the truth. That night, for the 10th time, Omorose vanished from her sleeping mat, but for the first time in the village's memory, when the sun rose the next morning, the water at the shore was completely empty. What Omorose experienced beneath the water, she would later describe to Iye in pieces, over many months, because some of it, she said, did not fit properly into human words no matter how she arranged them. She did not drown. She did not need to breathe in the way she needed to breathe on land, though she could not explain why. She walked, or something like walking, through a place that was neither fully water nor fully air, past coral structures, taller than the tallest building she had ever seen in the market town, past creatures that watched her without hostility, the way one watches a familiar face pass by. At the center of this place sat a figure who was not quite one shape, shifting between something like a woman crowned in cowrie shells, something like a great fish with eyes far too knowing for a fish, something like a light with no source. This, Omorose understood without being told, was Olokun. You are the first of your line to come to me and ask a question, instead of simply serving your year and returning quietly. Olokun said, and hey, its voice arrived less through Omorose's ears than through her chest. Your great-grandmother asked me to save children. She did not ask me what it would cost her daughters. I have been waiting 100 years for someone to finally ask. Olokun's answer to Omorose was not the answer the village had feared, and it was not the answer they had hoped for either. It was something stranger than both. The death was never measured in years, Olokun told her. It was measured in belief. Your great-grandmother believed, in the moment she walked into this water, that her village's children were worth more than her own comfort. That single belief was payment enough to end the hunger that same season. There has been no debt owed since that day, Omorose. Omorose, understandably, asked the question that would have been on any of our minds. Then why has the sea taken a daughter from my family every year for 3 generations? Olokun's answer was the twist that changed the entire meaning of this story. Because your family kept coming back to pay it, your great-grandmother's fear that the debt was not yet settled became a belief of its own, passed to her daughter and to her daughter's daughter, until the belief itself grew large enough to summon me every year, whether or not any payment was actually required. You are not here tonight because you owe me anything, child. You are here because 3 generations of women were too afraid to ask if the debt was already paid. Omorose asked one final question before the water began to lighten around her, signaling her return to shore. If I go back and tell them the debt was paid a century ago, will the sea ever take another daughter of my family again? Olokun's answer was quiet, almost gentle, and utterly final. Only if you are all still afraid enough to believe it should. Omorose returned to the shore at midday, hours after her usual dawn return, in front of nearly the entire village, who had gathered at the water's edge, out of a fear too large for any of them to stay indoors. She was not the same when she stood up out of the shallows. Not transformed in any way, the eye could describe exactly, still herself, still Omorose, but carrying herself the way a person carries themselves, after finally understanding something that had confused them their entire life. She told the village everything Olokun had told her. Some of the elders wept with relief. Some, strangely, seemed almost disappointed because the debt that has structured 3 generations of a family's fear becomes, in its own way, a kind of identity, and identities are hard to let go of, even when the letting go is good news. Iyeua was the last to speak. She took Omorose's face in both hands, the way grandmothers do, and said the only thing that mattered in that moment. I am sorry I let fear speak louder than the truth for so many years. I am sorry it took my granddaughter walking into the water herself to learn what an old woman should have asked 100 years ago. The following year, on the night of what would have been Omorose's 11th disappearance, the village gathered at the shore anyway, some out of habit, some out of hope, some simply because they had grown used to spending the night together. The water stayed still. Omorose slept in her own bed, under her own roof, for the first time on that date in her entire life. She woke the next morning to an ordinary sunrise, with nothing to explain, and nothing to recover from. She did not lose the gifts the sea had given her over the years, though. The healing hands, the fever that broke at her presence, the barren tree that bore fruit when she walked past it, all of it remained. Freely given now instead of paid for. Olokun, it seemed, had never actually wanted payment, only honesty. So, here is what I want to leave you with tonight, my people. Somewhere in your own life, in your family, in a fear you inherited without ever choosing it, in a burden you've been carrying because it's simply always been carried. There might be a debt that was quietly settled a long time ago, and nobody has been brave enough to ask. Tell me in the comments, do you think Omorose was right to go into that water and ask the question 3 generations of women were too afraid to ask? Or do you think some mysteries are better left undisturbed? And tell me, should I tell you what happened when Omorose finally met the great-grandmother spirit, Iye Aisosa herself, the woman who started all of this 100 years ago? That is a story I am only willing to tell if enough of you ask for it below. If this story reached something in you, subscribe, because the water always has one more story to give back. And if someone you know is still carrying a fear that outlived its reason, send them this one. Until the tide comes in again, my people, ask your questions before the silence answers them for you.